So the big thing here is no predetermined buyer. You are not marketing for a buyer beforehand like all the other strategies. Most of the other strategies, as soon as you get the contract, you start working on your buyer before you ever own it. That way you don't have to fund it and buy it.
Right.
This is all that out the window. You're actually gonna just buy it.
But now we're gonna have a little skin in the game. So not a ton of risk when you really know your market and know your numbers and do this correctly. But there's a little bit of risk when you buy a property. You do have to then exit that property, sell it to an end buyer.
Welcome back to this special Masterclass series. This is video 9 out of all these videos we've done specifically focused on exit strategies. And this has been a lot of fun. Thank you, Tony, for doing this with me. Man, it's been so great. I've learned so much from you, Tony, and I really appreciate your time. Tony flew all the way here to Puerto Rico. We're in the event center at my hotel, and we got another whiteboard video here, guys. Hope you're enjoying these, because it's one thing to hear concepts, and it's another thing to like break it down and see the numbers. And we've been consistent with like the same type of fictitious deal,
right,
so that you guys can see a comparison about how a deal that would fit this type of price point could play out with these different exits.
Right.
And so this has been really awesome. Hope you guys are enjoying this as much as we are. We're putting all these videos into a playlist so that you can go through these and learn these techniques. More than anything, we hope that this kind of opens your mind to learning and going even deeper into these multiple different exit strategies that we touched on. Guys, you could deep dive every single one of these, and you should, and become very proficient and an expert at these. And this one, Tony, we're pretty excited about because it's a model that's been around forever, like, right? But yet I'm doing quite a bit more of this. The ones that you've done, you've been like, man, that was such a better way to do this. And I think you're in the same boat as me, which is like, man, this solves a lot of problems. This fits a lot of things. This makes life a lot easier in some ways. We're going to talk about this. But what is the takedown method, and what is this more commonly known as, and how does this work?
Yeah, most people know it as a hotel method, right? Where you're not really wholesaling it, you're not really flipping it, you're doing something kind of in between. And that something in between is, we've been talking about who is your buyer for this deal and how are you going to exit this deal. Well, we are the buyer for the deal, right? You have the contract with the seller. Now, instead of assigning that contract or novating that contract or wrapping or doing anything creative, now all of a sudden we're actually buying it. We have a purchase agreement with the seller, and we're going to perform on that, and then we are going to then exit on our end to make our money, right?
So the big thing here is no predetermined buyer. You are not marketing for a buyer beforehand like all the other strategies. Most of the other strategies, like a novation or any of them, if you're gonna flip it or wholesale it, as soon as you get the contract, you start working on your buyer before you ever own it. That way you don't have to fund it and buy it.
Right.
This is all that out the window. You're actually gonna just buy it.
You're just gonna buy it. And with all those other strategies, there's very little risk because you don't have any skin in the game. The only skin in the game you have is the contract you have with the seller that you're now going to assign or novate. But now we're gonna have a little skin in the game. So not a ton of risk when you really know your market and know your numbers and do this correctly. But there's a little bit of risk when you buy a property. You do have to then exit that property, sell it to an end buyer.
Yeah, anytime you like take title to something, inherently you take on risk because now you own that asset, right?
Right, yeah, you're responsible for it. You're responsible for the loan. You know, a volcano could go off and nobody buys real estate for a year. You own that property.
Someone trips on the sidewalk in front of your house, they're gonna sue you, right? Like you have risk because you now own the asset. But the biggest thing that deters people from doing this strategy is access to capital to buy it. So that's the secret ingredient here. Like, this really only works if you're well-funded and you have the capital to take it down. We call it the takedown because you're going to take it down and buy it. But if you can solve that problem, which we'll talk about, if you can solve that problem, this strategy now becomes very, very appealing. The reason why people avoid it and you would do a novation instead or some other strategy is because you're trying to do a deal where you don't have to come up with capital and fund it.
Right. Yeah. And I always kind of look at it this way, because I've done this with my own cash and I've done it with lending. It always feels better with lending because it feels more risky with your own cash because your cash is sitting out there. You don't have access to it now. It's in an asset. And I kind of look at it the same way as if you go and every time you bought a cup of coffee, every time you bought anything, you were using cash instead of a credit card. it would feel different, right?
Yeah.
And it feels different in real estate when you use your own cash instead of credit. And it's hard to scale this exit strategy because you're going to run out of cash fast, unless you are a multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
But, most people in this industry, especially starting out, can do this without a ton of cash in their pocket. They can borrow the cash.
And that's the key. There is a way to do this with 100% funding, none of your own money, not even carrying costs, paying the payment until it sells again. So just before you guys tune this out and you're like, oh, well, there's no way I would do that. I don't have cash. There's a way to do that. So pay close attention because we're going to show that. And that is the secret ingredient. If you cannot get the capital to do these, then this doesn't really become a viable option. What's interesting, and this is fascinating to me, Tony, is when I meet like the biggest players in this game, when I meet guys like you and others that are doing this business at a high level, every single one of them I've talked to is doing this at some extent.
Right.
And oftentimes it's like, hey, the deal's going sideways, let's just buy it.
Yeah.
Because so we get all these problems out of the way, let's just buy it. And since they know how to either they have the cash or they have access to the cash, and you were telling me stories where you're like, man, this thing was going, it was a novation, it was going bad, and we just bought it.
Yep.
Okay, because when you buy it and you own it, you eliminate all those issues.
Yeah, it's such a weight off your shoulders when you do as many transactions as we've done, right? And we continue to do. If you're doing a couple deals a month, you don't really feel the pain of all the issues that come with off-market real estate and those strategies and dealing with distressed sellers and negotiating with a savvy investor and the regulations.
You had one where the seller would not let anybody in the property, even though they agreed to. Yeah. So how are you going to wholesale a house when your buyers can't get in the property?
Right.
So you were like, screw it, just buy the thing, get that seller out of the way, and now we can do our thing.
Yeah, and it was funny. That started off as a concept of a takedown.
Yeah.
But then, the way my brain works and everything, I'm like, let's just rehab this thing, make it immaculate. So it ended up being a flip. But you're absolutely right. We were having trouble. We had buyers that were salivating at this deal, but they absolutely had to walk it. There was some, issues with the foundation that needed to be addressed. And without them being able to inspect that, they were not comfortable buying the property. So I knew it was a good deal. I had a contractor in there before and he gave me the specifics of it. So I was safe knowing, hey, there's room in this deal. I'm just going to buy it, bought it, rehabbed it, and it's now listed on the market for about $100,000 profit. And it's getting a ton of walkthroughs in the last week.
That's awesome. We have one right now, Tony, where it started out an ovation. And it's a six-figure, it's like over $100,000 net to us. And seller went sideways. So seller calls up, they're upset. I thought we managed this okay. Like we're telling the seller, hey, this is the number you agreed on. So what we ended up doing was we switched it to this. We told the seller, we said, look, we'll close on Friday. And he took that because he was like, rather than wait, let's just get this seller out of the way now because the seller can bust up a novation no matter what paperwork you have. If they're like not on board, then the whole thing blows up.
Yeah, and so you can talk about litigation and stuff. Nobody wants to go to court.
You're not going to go to court?
Never.
Like, are you going to sue them? No, you're not going to sue them. You're going to move on and chalk it up as a deal gone south, right? So we ended up doing that. We ended up taking it down just to eliminate the seller so that we could keep our buyer and move forward. So you'll see in a minute here as we go through this why this might be another exit, another tool in your toolbox. So Tony, break it down for us. How do we run the numbers on a takedown?
Yeah, as we were writing this out, it really mirrors our novations, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the same kind of concept with the novations where you're taking its current market value, you're marketing it to an end buyer, and you're now taking a loan on it. The end buyer is using a lender. So it's all kind of the same concepts. The numbers are almost exactly the same. Where if our current market value was $205,000, and remember too, with the takedown method, these are properties just like innovations, right? Where they're livable, they don't need a ton of work. Yep. We might just trash them out, clean them up. We don't want to put a ton of money and rehab or anything into this. This is a quick transaction. We're just going to close on it. We're going to clean it and we're just going to list it. No major rehab, right?
Yep.
So all we have to do is take out our soft cost of 10%. And within that soft cost is going to be our closing cost on both sides now, right? We're closing with the seller. We're going to be closing with the buyer. So we have 2% as the closing cost. We leave about 1% for a trash out. You know, a lot of these properties, especially people that do wholesale deals, sometimes you get photos back of them and you're like, how can somebody live with all this trash in their house, right? Well, I think the best opportunity to then sell this to an end buyer is absolutely trashing it out and cleaning it up. That'll do wonders for your photos and just walkthroughs in general.
And if you think about it, I mean, 1% of 205, that's $2,000. So that gives you, you know, if you need a dumpster and haul away some stuff, do a cleaning, that number covers, like, maybe you got a couple months of like insurance. So it's just a little bit of that, get this property ready,
right,
so that we can then resell it.
Right. You got to leave yourself some room in there for that trash out, a little bit of insurance, and then 4% for the agent's commission. And like you were saying, if you have a good relationship with an agent, you pay 1% on the listing and 3% on the buyer's agent, right? And, you know, starting off in this, maybe that's negotiable with your agents, but when you know what you're doing, you can absolutely negotiate those percentages, right? And then 3% for funding, right? So we're gonna use a lender to take down this deal. We got to leave a little bit of room in there for the fees on the money that we're borrowing to buy this property, right?
So if you think about it, this is 3%, again, 3% of your as-is number. So what is that, about $6,000 or $7,000?
Yeah, about $6,000, I think.
Yeah. So I think this is funding. Now that 3% is to get 100% funding to buy this. We'll get to the buy price, but that's covering your cost of capital. It's built right into the deal. So I look at it like it's just a cost of doing business.
Right.
I got to pay the lender to give me the money to buy this property. We're only in the money for 60 days, hopefully, right? And then that gets paid off when we resell it.
Yeah.
So you built that in, guys. That's the key here, is you built in the cost of the money. So you don't have to, now if you're funding this yourself, then you're not going to have a funding cost. But like you said, you cannot scale. You're going to run out of money real quick.
Yep. This takes a little longer to sell. Another deal comes across your table and you can't buy it because this one hasn't sold. That's why you need good lending, whether it's private, whether it's a hard money lender. You have to have that in place so you can take opportunities and make more money. So I love how we broke down the soft cost, because there's always going to be soft costs.
And that adds up to about 10, right?
About 10%. And then, so our net now is 185 after this is bought and sold on the market. The net at 185, we want to leave about 20% in there for our profit. Now on this property, that 20% is going to be $41,000, and our offer to the seller then is $144, which pretty much, like we said, matches up with novations. And a funny thing is, when you're leaving 20% in for your profit, 10% in for your soft cost, it's really just the 70% rule
of as is.
Of as is, and what the current market is telling you what this property is going to sell at, because you're not doing a rehab, right? It's just how it sits is how it's going to sell. And it's easy to find comps because most properties on the MLS that are either for sale or sold are in as is condition. Most of them aren't flipped. So when you're looking for those numbers, you're going to be more accurate in a current market value or as is condition than you are with everything that can go wrong with looking for ARV. It's hard to find that needle in a haystack that we said on the Novations video, and it's hard to figure out what the rehab truly is when you're on the phone with a seller and you're not walking the property or having an inspection yet. So there's a lot of variables there. So the current market value and running comps on deals that you are taking down or doing novations on are going to be much easier than with, creative buy and hold and flip and the rehabs and the ARVs and stuff and cash flows that need to go into that, because there's so many variables, right?
Yeah, totally. And if you think about it, 10% for soft costs, 20% for profit means that you're buying at 70% of as is value. What a simple formula.
Yeah,
like,
so
oh my
simple.
gosh, it makes your analysis like, what's the as is value? 70%, there's our offer price, done.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, you don't even need a formula for that. Like, it's so easy. And I love that simplifies that so much.
Yeah, it's great. Because as we're writing this out, we're like, man, this is the simplest formula of all of them. And another great thing about it, not only is the formula really easy and it's such a simple concept, everything's written out here. Like we said, the comps are easy. It's easy to find that as is value. This is a very easy formula and transaction. and there's way less issues. There's no Dispo now. The Dispo is literally hiring an agent to list this property, and they're doing all the work.
Because the buyer's agent's going to handle the buyer, the listing agent's going to do the listing.
They're working for you.
So no outreach to cash buyers or any of that. That all goes away with this.
Yeah, all that work and time and effort goes away on the Dispo side, and you control the whole transaction. You own the property. You can control it. So a lot of issues happen during our off-market deals and assignment of contract and novations. You know, it's all these hot topics and people talk about them, and it's a huge part of what we do. You need everything though. And when a deal is going sideways, especially, and you know this thing is gonna make money, then the takedown method is great. But just in general, when you're looking at a deal and this makes sense, that's why you gotta know, all right, what exit strategy works best? Is the seller at the 144? Can we all agree upon that? But they're not comfortable with the novations process. They just want you to buy it and close it and be done with it. You can close sooner. You know, you don't have to give them a waiting period. You don't have all these walkthroughs and all that. You're literally just taking it down, cleaning it up, listing it, and now you're gonna sell it to an end buyer using probably a lender.
And especially with the regulations that are coming down.
Yes.
Right? Like, wholesaling is only going to get more, traditional wholesaling, it's only going to get more complicated, more challenging. They're going to pass more laws, more requirements, more disclosure. It's never going to go easier. It's only going to go harder.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see in a lot of states where they're cracking down on a lot of things. You know, in Colorado now or in Oregon now, you have to get registered as a wholesaler and pay fees every year. And they want to know what you're doing. I mean, like, it's just going to become more complicated. Whereas the takedown method, there is nothing that will ever stop you from buying a property, now you own it, and reselling a property.
Yep. The only thing you would need to be focused on is where you're getting your money, right?
Solve that problem and your game on.
Your focus goes away from your disposition process, and now it gets focused on how do I get more money and how do I get these relationships with hard money and private money so I can do more of this, right?
And one of the things I like about this over like fix and flip is I've been a fix and flipper and I'm very active, and sometimes I've been like, it's been a big model. I have times in my career where I was doing 50 to 80 fix and flips a year, and it was bananas. You and I were talking about like how challenging flipping can be. There's so many variables that can go wrong with contractors and everything else, and budgets and overruns and timelines. And so it's extremely difficult to scale a fix and flip business. Really hard.
It really is, yeah.
This you can scale though, because remember, you're not renovating.
You're not dealing with contractors. You're not finding new contractors in new markets. Finding a listing agent is a lot easier on a deal, on a property that you own, as opposed to a property that you're novating, because you're not having to explain the whole process to them. You don't have to use a specific title company either. Now the buyer can use whatever title company they want if you want to run it that way, because there's not a ton of risk like in novations where now you're talking your buyer's agent into, we kind of got to use my title company to make sure this thing goes through because it's, a different transaction. There's a lot of education that goes into all these other ones, where this exit strategy, the takedown method, is so much cleaner. And you notice we don't have a range here, though, right? I know where your brain was going there.
Talk about that.
And the reason we don't really have a range here is because, like we said, in the novations, there is a range where we want to at least end at that $25,000 profit for us. But there's not a lot of risk with novations, right? With the risk factor, which isn't huge, but there is a little bit of risk there with owning a property, we want to make at least 20% on this deal, right? Or it probably isn't worth it. And
I mean, with this, you're buying it. So there's no going back and adjusting something. You're not renegotiating you bought it.
Yeah, you bought it. You're signed, sealed, delivered.
Your range would be, you're going in to make 41, but then you're in it one more month, or a buyer wants some concessions. So your range is really, this could get eaten into when you go to resell. But so that's why we want to be at that 20%. At the end of the day, if you make 25 because things happen, great. You're still okay.
It gives you more options to move this quickly to a buyer that maybe you do have to give concessions to, right?
Right.
And you could either wait it out and try and find a new buyer, but if you're like, hey, I can make 25 grand, 30 grand on this, let's just move on it now, give them, concessions, and we'll get my cash back quick, because the cash cycle is a little slower on these. But you can still give yourself enough room with that 20% where you can move it. Maybe you don't make 40, maybe you make 30. Oh, shucks.
Yeah.
You know,
but that sucked. And but you'll cry for a minute and then.
Yeah, you can still get it closed out. The only other challenge, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly on a takedown method. We've talked a couple of both, but what about like the challenges with FHA buyers in a seasoning period?
Yeah, so that is the one challenge with this model is if your end buyer is FHA, FHA has an anti-flipping rule where they require 90 days of seasoning, meaning once you take it down for the 144, if the end buyer is FHA, they won't let you resell it for the 90-day window. Now that sucks because we want to do it in 60 days. So now you're in it another 30 days. It pushes out your cash conversion cycle. You're waiting now that much longer to make a profit. Remember, you don't make money until it closes on the resale.
Right.
So now that sucks because you're waiting out a little bit. You also have to factor in, like we would bump this number up a bit, probably to 4,
right,
to cover one more month of interest.
Right.
So you'd have to buy it a little bit deeper, be in it a little bit longer.
Right.
And I hate that. I mean, I wish we didn't have that. So that's a nuance of this model where you're going to have to be aware of.
That's one of those frustrating things where it doesn't make sense to us, right?
Yeah.
Or anybody,
so
really.
Frustrating.
Because it's like, why do you need that seasoning period?
Yeah. What we've done a few times, though, is we know we're probably going to get an FHA buyer, but we're priced so well and it's such a hot deal that we just say no to FHA and then we get a conventional.
Yeah.
So that's one thing too, is like, you don't have to take an FHA. You can say, no, we won't take FHA.
Sure.
Or we've had times too where it's an FHA, but the only reason why they're FHA is because it's more convenient, but they qualify for conventional.
Yeah.
So we'll just tell the agent, we'll say, hey, we'd like to take your offer, but we can't do FHA because of the seasoning rule. And the agent will say, well, let me talk to them and the lender. And then they just move it to a conventional,
right?
And we're good.
Yeah, that's a good point. And start
You don't
have to, and start asking those questions of the buyer's agent or the buyers themselves. Of if you don't want to take an FHA or you don't want to take a conventional, you want to take cash or whatever it might be, you can simply ask. There's a lot of buyers too. In another video, we'll talk about the flat fee MLS. Where they're like, hey, will you take conventional? No. Do you have a cash buyer? Yeah, they can use cash. Okay, then you're having that conversation. So it's absolutely appropriate in this exit strategy where if an FHA doesn't work, ask if they can go conventional because you're not accepting FHA.
One thing we did when I was flipping a lot, I was flipping entry-level homes, so almost all of them were FHA, is we found a local lender that did conventional, but very close to FHA guidelines. So like down payment amount and things like that. So then what we would do, now the credit score had to be kind of really good to get those low down conventional loans, but we would convert a lot of our buyers over to our preferred lender that had a great loan program.
Right.
So that's another way that you can sort of, just be proactive. Like I was always proactive because I would buy a house and rehab it in 2 weeks and put it back on the market, right? And I got to wait now because my buyer's FHA.
Yeah.
Oh, it was the most frustrating thing. So I'm glad you brought that up because that is one of the nuances with this takedown model is FHA.
And having those relationships in this industry with that lender, the more relationships you create in this industry, whether it's different exit strategies or working with lenders or title companies, we can all work together to get these types of deals done. I love that you mentioned that because when we have a preferred lender,
excuse me.
Salute. We know that the deal is going to get done because it's our preferred lender and we know how they work, right? And we can kind of control the transaction a little more because we're direct to lender. And it's the same with the title companies, which is why we stress so much. You got to use your preferred title companies on all these different creative deals because a title company that's not used to it, it's going to blow up in your face.
Yeah.
So really gain these relationships with title companies and lenders and help your buyer get this thing to the closing table, help the agent that they're using get it to the closing table, right? So you need to work this entire deal, seller to buyer, to make sure it gets to the closing table. But the beautiful thing on this is you're the buyer and now you're selling the property and it's just so much cleaner, right?
Totally. I'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this video today, right here where I'm recording at the Looking Glass Hotel and Event Center. Located in the heart of San Juan, Puerto Rico, just 10 minutes from the airport and walking distance to the best restaurants, shopping, and beaches, this newly renovated hotel is the perfect spot for meetups, events, retreats, and podcasting. So if you want to create an unforgettable experience, come to the Looking Glass Hotel and Event Center. Click the link below this video in the description for more details. Yeah. So guys, this is super exciting, and I hope you've really liked to see this comparison. That's been really helpful, Tony, to see like, okay, all these different exits using the same deal example to break down all these different ideas here. So I think we've got like one more we want to do. We'll probably sit down and do that because we don't need the whiteboard, but we want to talk about one more exit in another video. And then we've got some more stuff too we want to cover in the series. So please stay tuned. Make sure that you're clicking on that playlist link. We'll put it in the description. That's where we're putting all these videos. So depending on when these get released, if you want to see all of this content like organized together, check out that playlist. I'm also going to put in the description below the video links to some of Tony's stuff, his social. He has a training program where he goes into depth about all these strategies even more, and a community model where he'll actually get on the phones and you can do live calls and he'll show you how that works. Because it's just fantastic to learn, earn while you learn, right? Or learn as you're earning is really great here. So we'll put those down there below too. And leave a comment, say, Tony, you're a flipping genius. I mean, guys, he flew all the way here to Puerto Rico to be here for 2 days doing all of this content. He's busy. He's got his businesses, 50 some transactions going on right now. And he's taking time to give you free education to learn this stuff. So I hope you see the value in that, and leave comments and let us know what you're learning, what you appreciate, what you like, your takeaways, questions that you have, any comments, and we'll try to help you along the way with that too. And also for the takedown method, before I forget, I've got a kit there as well with some fantastic resources, some scripts, my contract, a deal analyzer, some things like that can really help you as well. A guide, there's I think it's like a 20 or 30 page guide on like how it works. So check that resource out as well. And we'll see you guys on the next video.